I would first like to say thank you to my friends and family for helping me put this together and collect my thoughts, and run me through this speech and edit it with me. I'm here today to tell you a story about community. Communities are really important to a sense of belonging and happiness and meaning that we find in our lives. And community comes in all shapes and forms. I'm sure that a lot of you are in communities, whether they're families or groups on campus, your floors, classroom settings. Those are all different types of communities. And as I give this talk, I want you to keep those communities in mind. When I was 7, I joined a group that I'll refer to as the Order. And this group was based in Milwaukee. I joined the Order. And this group was based on trying to make people better people and making them more responsible, more reflective. It was a group that was interested in volunteer work, giving to the less fortunate. There was like a spiritual aspect of it where there was meditation and song. We wanted to serve a higher good beyond ourselves and to help the community and world as a whole. This group was particularly appealing to my mom in that she could grow and contribute as a woman. In a lot of spiritual societies and groups, often women cannot have the same opportunities as men. But in this group, women were valued equally. And so she became very much a part of this group and experienced a lot of growth and development, and that was very appealing to her. This group was led by someone, or two people, named the father and the mother. My mom will remain mom for the rest of the story, but the mother and father will refer to those two head figures. They were people that were seen in the group as being all-knowing, and they had great advice to give. They were very supportive of us in our lives and had really good techniques of getting us to share our stories and to support each other. They were considered very special people in our group and had a lot of esteem. When I was about 11, I moved to Kansas City, and there I was joined by a woman named Maria. She was another woman in the Order who had moved from Boston, and she lived with me and my mom and was assigned to be my counselor and my spiritual teacher in a lot of ways, and took over some of the mothering responsibilities that my mother had previously held. My mom still lived in the same house as us, but if I had any questions or concerns, I would always go to Maria. I lived in the Order for another 4 years, and after a while, some of the practices, which I'll go into some detail later, started to become a little bit more grating and weren't exactly in sync with our personal values, or those of my mother particularly, because she was the one driving the boat on this one. These practices made my mom uncomfortable, and she started to question the group she was in. I was about 14 at the time, so I'd been in the group for half of my life, and I couldn't really understand why she was questioning the group, because it's all I'd ever known. I never had questioned it myself. And the people in the group were very much my family, so I had brothers and sisters in the sense that I don't have real siblings in life, but I had people my age that I connected with and felt like were my family in this group, and aunts and uncles and mother and father figures like the mother and the father. So when my mom said that she wanted to leave this group, I sided against her with the father of this group. And he told me that my mom was trying to take me away from God and that she was a demon. And because I'd been in this group for half my life, I obviously believed him because I'd always believed him about everything else. And that's what I'd been trained to do my whole life. The father of the group promised to come back for me when I was 18 and rescue me from my corruptive mother. And when I was 14, I agreed with him on that plan and decided it was a good idea, because who wants to live with a mother who's a demon, right? So, anyways, so the people who were living in our house with us were kicked out by my mom. And my mom and I lived together again, just us two, for another couple of years while I went through high school. I realized my mom was not a demon. And I also learned a lot of the other uglier workings of the group that I hadn't seen as a child being raised in this group. At the age of 14, or 15 rather, it took me a couple months to realize this, I came to accept that for half of my life, I had been raised in a cult. How could this have happened? Cults are often seen as evil or destructive or very extreme, And people who join cults, I think, are often labeled as those who are of extreme notions or are radicals. But we joined a cult for good reasons, and it was accidental that it was a cult. When we were in this group, we didn't see it as a cult. We saw it as a group that was bringing us closer to God, yes, but a lot of groups do that. We didn't worship Satan or dark objects. Our faith was actually in line with the faith of over 50% of other Americans. In this way, my story could be almost anyone's. You probably aren't in a cult, but I'm not assuming anything. But you probably are in other communities, and some of those might be dysfunctional. Some communities that aren't necessarily dysfunctional, but just some to keep in mind that you might be a part of as I'm going through my speech are things like sports teams and sororities, country clubs, office groups, book groups, Zumba groups, your local post office friends, I don't know. Just every kind of group you can think of, like, groups are all around us. It's almost impossible not to be in a group unless you just never talk to anyone ever, which I hope that is not you, because groups are wonderful. The people in a group aren't usually the problem. The problem that I see in other groups, like where hazing happens, is how the group is led and how power is wielded. And when power is wielded in a way that is abusive, bad things tend to happen. And people in the groups do things that might even be against their own values. I'm going to talk about some of the unhealthy practices of this group I was in. And these might resemble some of those you see in other classic cults. But remember, these types of behaviors can be found in any type of community and are something to look out for in your own community lives. Cult mechanism number 1 is to dangle membership in front of the group. Something you might hear is, you're either with us or you're against us. If any of us argued with the father and mother of this group, we would be publicly humiliated and ostracized. We would be told that we were demons. And other people in this group would also be told rumors about us, so they would give us the cold shoulder. And we were thought of as contaminated if we ever questioned the mother and the father. You either had to cooperate or get out, because if you didn't cooperate, you were left alone, which in a group, if a group is rejecting you that you're a part of, it's the worst feeling. Because there was a lot of power associated with that, the mother and father could ask for almost anything. They could get money, obedience, and loyalty. Some of the first things they'd have us do is they'd say, oh, you have a really nice shoe collection. I love these shoes. But they would say, you have a lot of shoes, and I feel like your pride is too high because of all these shoes. You should just give them all away. And people would do this. They'd be like, okay, if that brings me closer to God and the truth and happiness, I will do this. Or they'd say, oh, you have too many pets. You're a dog person, but really you should spend more time in meditation rather than playing outside with your dogs. And people would give their pets away. And this would escalate over time until things were happening you live in a really big house, or you drive a really fancy car. You should sell that car and give us the money so we could fund other events. Which people did this because it was to serve God and the greater good, and we genuinely wanted to be better people. But in some ways, we were being taken advantage of. So if all this was going on, why didn't people just leave? This brings us to cult mechanism number 2, which is making us suspicious of outsiders. Something we heard, and that you might have heard in your life too, we are the only way to find happiness, truth, and God. Everyone else was considered lost. Outsiders were contaminants and distracting, even family. We were restricted from seeing family, so we'd see them as often as we wanted when we first joined, and then we'd see them maybe once a week, and then once a month, once a year, and then finally just not at all. Some things they had the higher-ups in the group do, like if you were a priest or a deacon, and you were high up in the stratifications, you would be asked to write a letter to your parents telling them all the things they ever did wrong to you. And this was seen as a liberating experience, a reflective, truth-bearing experience. But in effect, what it did is that a lot of the parents of the people who were in the group disowned their children, further separating them from the outside world, which proved to the people in the group that the outside world was rejecting of their faith and that they were contaminants and family weren't to be trusted. On the other side of that, too, if families saw that their sons and daughters were missing for months on end because of this group, they would obviously say, like, hey, I never see you anymore. I miss you. Come back to us. This group is taking you away from our family. And we would say back to them that they're just a temptation and that they're trying to take us away from God, because that's what it felt like. They were trying to take us away from this group that we felt was so good, that was making us better people, because it was making us better people. But there was a corrupted system in place that was abusing us at the same time. The easiest way to dominate people is by separating them, not only from within the group and separating them from the outside of the world, but from also separating individuals within the group from each other. What this looked like in contact with this group was, for example, my reassignment to Maria. She took on the mothering duties of my mom. And after a while, I wasn't allowed to talk to my mom anymore, even though she lived in the same house as me. I could ask her things like, I'm out of soap. Can you get me some soap? But that was like we weren't really allowed to talk about my spiritual development or what it was like going through puberty or middle school or being emo. I was emo. It was a thing. But how this also manifested in the group was that children were separated from their parents. I luckily wasn't taken away and put in a different city, but other children were sent to retreat camps. There was one in Minnesota, actually. And their family would be left in the city, becoming more ingrained in the system as priests and deacons. And the children would be raised to be deacons in training in a different location. Some other things they did is they'd separate couples that came into the group together as a unit. So if you were married and you had a wife, or if you were a man and you had a husband even, they would separate you and reassign you to someone else to be married to sometimes. And then they would tell you whether you had to be celibate for life or if you had to have a family with this new person. And for example, there was one man that joined with his partner who was another man. They were forced to split. His partner left the group. He stayed because he wanted to become a better person. And he was asked to marry a woman and start a family with her, even though he was not of that orientation. Here we see cult mechanism number 3, which is to use the secrets and privacy of members against them. Everything that we knew was told to the father and the mother. If we saw something, we wrote them an email. We called them up. We told them in passing. They knew everything about everyone always. And the way they did this was that they would see something you were doing wrong and call you out on it and ostracize you in front of the group. And also, if they saw you seeing something and not telling them about it, then they would also call you out and say, like, why didn't you tell me that so-and-so was stealing cake from the refrigerator every night? Our group was very structured. You couldn't do things like that. And so the system came to be that we were all tattletaling on each other all the time. Because if you told the father and mother something juicy, like, oh, so-and-so has been missing meditation because they've been bird watching, then they would hear about it and they would inflict punishment on that person. And you would get points for telling them. So you'd go up in the books. The best way to climb the hierarchy in this group seemed to be that if you had enough details than everyone else and shared them openly with the father and mother, you seemed to be promoted very quickly from someone who was a student to a deacon, and then to a priest, and then to like the higher-ups from there. So it was a way to punish and control and get obedience, while also making a hierarchy of structure for status. So how did I move out of this unhealthy place? My mom left, but when I left, I felt like I'd lost my family because I'd known them all so well for half my life. There were like 300 people that I felt very close to that suddenly I was never allowed to talk to again. It'd be like if you were told when you graduated Carleton, like, just can't talk to anyone from Carleton ever again. Sorry. It was uncomfortable for me, and I wanted to contact them and talk to them. And I was like looking at the day when the father was going to come back and rescue me from my demon mom. Even though I didn't think she was a demon anymore, I still wanted to talk to people in the group and ask how they were doing and ask how their children were and know them, just like you all want to know each other too at Carleton. What helped change my decision about going back into the group when I was 18 was that Maria came to visit us one day, and she had left with the group the day my mom kicked everyone out of the house. She had a very trying circumstance where she was in this group, the order, and she was also doing very well in her career, and she was excelling on a national level and getting a lot of recognition for her work. And the father noticed she was putting a lot more energy into her job than into the cult. And he didn't like that, and he wanted to get her more on track and get her more ingrained with this group. And so he put her into a room for 10 days in solitary isolation. Didn't lock the door, because that'd be a liability. You don't want to get sued if you're a group like that. So she was staying there of her own free will, in isolation, being fed meals a couple times a day, and told that she was worthless and a demon. And the end product of this, after 10 days, was her work called her and said, "You're going to lose your job, you don't come to work." And she had to make a decision, and she decided she would leave because she figured out that this was crazy. This group was abusing her. And so she went to work and reestablished herself there and did very well and went into counseling and then came and visited my mom and me and told us this story about abuse. And that helped to change my opinion of this group a little bit more, thinking like, even though there are all these great people in this group that are my family, the system and the way that it is being run is not something that I want to be a part of. So when the group did come back for me when I was 18, I was able to reject them and move on. It's really difficult to leave a situation like that. Like for my mom, after being it for 7 years, or for Maria, you think back on your time in a group like that, and you have to think to yourself, have I been doing it wrong this whole time? Have I been living a lie? You have to admit to the mistakes you've made and seek help, because you realize you've lost your footing. The best way to get over a group that you decide isn't healthy for you anymore is to talk about it with friends and seek help and just contrast what your life is like compared to what it could be with other people. You should question your choices in your situation. Have you ever been in a group that brings you down or makes you feel like there's no escape? It happens to a lot of us, and you don't have to stay. I'm going to go into a little epilogue here. When I was in the group, we weren't allowed to look up the group's name online. And that was because the group had their own website. It was like, "Welcome to our group. We will help you find God." And then the website right below that, listed on Google, was actually an anti-website, their community website blog that was created by people who had left the group, had found happiness, truth, and God outside of the group, and were there to support other people who weren't thinking of leaving. And the father and mother were afraid of us finding this website and finding that we could leave and had a place to go after leaving. So it's by joining together through redemption and understanding that we're able to escape unhealthy communities in our lives, in your lives. I want you to ask yourselves to evaluate your communities and take a look at what do they really look like. Are they dysfunctional? Do they dangle your membership or make you give up your secrets, use them against you, or make you suspicious of other people who aren't in your group? Why do you stay?